This is 2023 A-level Economics MCQ paper. Look at this question 1. It says economic resources can be simply classified into two main categories such as, okay, see, the question talks about the economic resources. So you don't need to think about this classification where we classify resources into two as non-economic resources and economic resources, because this question is entirely from the economic resources. So generally these economic resources we classify into four. So what are the four? First one is land, second one is labor, third one is capital, and the last one is about entrepreneurship. Right? So normally economic resources we classify into four. But I hope that you will remember land resources and capital resources we can take into a single category and call that category as property resources. Right? We recognize this category as property resources. And then labor and entrepreneurship we can again take into a single category and we can call that as human resources. Human resources. See, this is the answer for the question. If they are talking about the two main categories of economic resources, the two main categories must be property resources and then human resources. And we find it in the fourth option. So the answer for the first one is the fourth. Right, so no point of discussing the other options because this answer is very straightforward and the question is really easy. Right, look at this question number 2. What is the fundamental difference between needs and wants? Okay, so by definition, what's the difference? We say needs are the basic requirement needed for human survival, and wants are the different forms of fulfilling needs. Right. So if you look at the first one, needs are essential for survival. Yes, true. While wants are desires only. Yes. I told you earlier that wants are the different forms of fulfilling needs. And here it says that wants are the desires. Both communicate the same idea. Right. Second one, wants are essential for survival. No, wants are not essential for survival. And then it says needs are desires only. No, the opposite is true. Third one, needs and wants are considered to be synonyms in economics. No, by definition, we have a difference between the two. Fourth one, wants can be satisfied with limited resources while needs cannot. No, it's simply, see, wants can we satisfy the wants using the limited resources? We can't, and that we recognize as scarcity in economics. So this is wrong then. Fifth one, needs are changing over time while wants do not change over time. No, again, the opposite is true. Wants change over time. Okay, look at the third question. 3 points on the production possibilities curve of a certain economy that produces only two goods, X and Y, are given below. Okay, so we get the production possibilities, then good X, and also we have good Y. According to the production possibilities data, it can be concluded that, okay, so before we look at the given options, right, we will calculate the marginal opportunity cost, right? So we'll find the marginal opportunity cost of good X. Good X. So what's the equation of calculating this MOC of good X? We write the equation delta Y divided by delta X. Right. So in the first production possibility, production combination, the production of good X is 3 and the production of good Y is 0. And in the second production combination, production of good X is 2 and the production of good Y is 3. So we can find delta Y, that's the difference between these two values, and that's 3. So delta Y is 3. And what's the difference between these two? Because that's delta X. So the difference is 1. So you can write the value as 3. Right. Now look at the third production combination. That's where they produce 0 from good X and 9 from good Y. Okay. So once again, if you look at the delta Y, This time delta y is 6 and then delta x is 2. So once again, how much is the marginal opportunity cost of producing good X? That's 3, same as the previous value. And what does this remind you? See, marginal opportunity cost is constant. So if marginal opportunity cost is constant, I have mentioned this in several other papers as well. If MOC is constant, PPC will be a straight line, right? If MOC is constant, PPC will be a straight line. And if you ask me, what are the reasons for having a constant MOC? What are the reasons for having a straight line PPC? What are the reasons? First one could be homogeneous resources, right? Homogeneous resources. And second one could be having same technology, having same technology. Another one could be having same resource efficiency, right? Having same resource efficiency. So due to these reasons, MOC becomes constant. When MOC is constant, PPC takes the straight line shape. Right now, with all this in mind, we'll read the provided options. First one, resources of this country are homogeneous. 100% true. Why? Because when resources are homogeneous, MOC becomes constant and then PPC takes the straight line, right? Everything matches, right? The second one, the combination of 3 units of good X and 9 units of good Y is attainable. Look at this one, combination of 3 units of good X. So if they are producing according to the given production possibilities table, if the economy is producing 3 units of good X, it's impossible for them to produce a single unit of good Y. So that this second option has to be false then, because in the second option they say that the economy can produce 3 units of good X and then 9 units of good Y simultaneously, which is false. Third one, to achieve the combination of 3 units of good X and 9 units of good Y would not require to employ all its resources. See, 3 units of good X and 9 units of good Y is impossible to achieve. It's impossible. Inisa තියෙන resources ඔක්කොම employ කළත් it's still impossible because this production possibilities table represents the maximum possible production possibilities. Meet වඩා බෑ. Then table එකේ කියනවා නම් when they are producing 3 units of good X, they cannot produce a single unit of good Y කියලා. We can't say that they can produce 9 units of good Y by employing or unemploying. මුකුත් කතන්දර valid නෑ. Fourth one, the opportunity cost of producing good X increases as more units of good Y are produced. See that now, opportunity cost of producing good X increases. So what has happened? It remains the same. Fifth one, the opportunity cost of producing good X decreases as more units of Y are produced. Now, once again, it remains constant, right? So that's not the answer there, right? The fourth one, look at the fourth one. Which economic system is characterized by state ownership of capital and reliance on market allocation of resources? Okay, so think about mixed economic systems, right? We have mixed economic systems. So there are two main types of mixed economic systems. The first one, let's recognize that to be socialist market economies. The other one is social market economies. So what's the difference between these socialist market economies and social market economies? In socialist market economies, resources are owned by public sector, right? Resources are owned by the public sector. But though the resources are owned by the public sector, they still use price mechanism to solve basic economic problems. And that's what they say here. The system, economic system, which is characterized by state ownership of capital, simply resources, and the reliance of market allocation of resources. Market allocation of resources means price mechanism. right? So what's the answer then? It has to be this fourth one, socialist market economies. And in the previous paper, I hope that you remember that we discussed about the social market economies. And in these social market economies, resources are owned by the private sector. Similar to a free market economic system, here in a social market economic system also, resources are owned by the private sector. But the government intervention is really high in these social market economies to increase the social welfare. So that's a quality in social market economies. All right, now we'll move to the fifth one. In the fifth one, we get this. Which of the following is not a determinant of demand? So what are the determinants of demand? When we develop the demand function, we say quantity demanded is a function of price of the considered good, prices of related goods, consumers' income, consumers' taste, future price expectations, number of consumers, and then other factors. So these seven we recognize as the determinants of demand. That will be the answer for this question. Right. The first one says price of substitute good. See, it falls under the prices of related goods. So that is a determinant of demand. Second one says the expected price of the good in the next month. This is the future price expectations, EX, which is again a determinant of demand. The third one, the price of complementary goods. See, the prices of complementary goods are also included in prices of related goods. So that is also a determinant of demand. Fourth one, price of an input used to produce good. See, this is not a determinant of demand, but this is a determinant of supply. So this is the answer for the question because this is not a determinant of demand. The fifth one, income level of consumers. See, it is a determinant of demand. Right, now look at this sixth one. There it says the demand and supply curves for oranges in a competitive market is given by the following equations respectively. So we get the demand equation and the supply equation. If the price of an orange is set to rupees 100 in this market, then there will be an excess demand or excess supply. So that's what we need to select. Okay, so let's see how much would be the quantity demanded if the price is rupees 100. See, just replace 100 with this P in the demand equation. So 5 into 100 will be 500. Then 600 minus that 500 will give you how much? 100. And let's see how much is the quantity supplied when the price is again 100. So 3 multiplied by the price 100 will be 300. So minus 240 plus 300 will be plus 60. So the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. And by how much? By 40 units. Quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied by 40 units. And as a result, we say in this given market, when the price is 100, we have an excess demand of how much? 40 units. So the answer for this question 6 has to be the first one. Right. Look at the seventh one. If both demand and supply increase simultaneously, I don't know how many times they had asked this thing in our previous discussions in the previous A-level papers. So this is what happens when both get increased. ඔයා ඒ videos බලලා නැත්තම් මම අනිවාර්යෙන් ඔයාලට කියනවා බලන්න කියලා. skip කර කර බලන්න එක නෙමෙයි වඩා වටින්නේ. ඔයා speed කැමතිම නම් speed play කරලා හැබැයි ඔක්කොම ටික බලන්න. Right. So assume that this is the demand and supply curve. So based on the curves, this is the price, initial price, and this is the initial quantity. So we get the demand and then we get the supply here. Right. Now let me copy this. Here. Now listen. So what happens? Demand and supply both get increased. Okay. So let's assume that the demand get increased by this amount, but the supply get increased slightly. Right? Supply get increased slightly. Okay, now what happens? Price has increased, quantity has also increased. You can understand that. See, price increases, quantity increases. Now the opposite. Let's say that the supply increases significantly, but the demand increases slightly. See what happens. The new price is lower than the previous price, but the quantity is greater than the previous value. So price is lower, but the quantity is higher. And in the third situation, let's say that the increase in demand is same as the increase in supply. So what happens to the price? Nothing happens to the price. Price remains the same, but somehow the quantity has increased. So these are the all possible scenarios. Now, based on these three scenarios, I hope that you can find the answer. See what happens. If both demand and supply increase simultaneously, අපිට කියන්න පුළුවන් මෙන්න මේ වගේ කතන්දරයක් විතරයි. මොකද්ද? Equilibrium price could rise or fall, but equilibrium quantity will increase. ඇත්තම කියනවා නම් මේකේ price or fall කියන එකටත් වඩා තව option එකක් තියෙන්න ඕන. මොකද්ද? It could rise, fall or remain constant, but equilibrium quantity will increase. So that's a precise answer, but from the 5 options given to us, this is the most suitable one. So for this 7th one, 3rd one is the answer. Right, now look at this 8th question. There it says the two supply curves in the diagram are parallel. All right, so it's visible to us. In the price range between 30 to 40, right? In the price range between 30 to 40, what happens? The curve S1 is more price elastic than the curve S2. And then the curve S2 is more price elastic than the curve S1. Okay, so it's about elasticity, and this is very easy. So let's assume that we have another supply curve starting from the origin, which is again parallel to both the previous supply curves. Right. Then what's your comment on the elasticity of supply on these three curves? If the supply curve starts from the price axis, we say supply is elastic. Right? Supply is elastic. And if supply curve starts from the origin, we say supply is unitary elastic. And if the supply curve starts from the quantity axis, we say supply is inelastic. Right? So it doesn't matter which price level you consider. In any given price level, PES values you receive for this supply curve will be greater than the values you receive for this second supply curve. මොකද හේතුව second supply curve එක, since it starts from the quantity axis, it's anyway inelastic compared to the first supply. දැන් ඔයා මේ මැද තියෙන එකේ supply එක ඕන price level එකක හොයන්න, answer will always be 1. හරි, එහෙනම් මොකද කතන්දරේ? මොකද answer එක? The curve S1 is more price elastic than the curve S2. So that's the answer. Right, now we'll move to this 9th one. In the 9th one, it says, if a firm wants to increase its revenue and it knows that the price elasticity of demand for its product is equal to minus 0.82, it should. Okay, look at this one. The price elasticity of demand is minus 0 point something. It's anyway, it has to be minus. But the problem here is this is a value less than 1. Why is that? Because demand is inelastic. Right? Demand is inelastic. So I hope that you remember this theory. මොකක්ද? Let me take elasticity. Elasticity to the first column, and then relationship between price and producer's revenue, PR, and then let me take meaning for the last column. So this is not the first time that I'm explaining this one. I have explained this same thing using tables, using graphs. I have explained this in previous papers as well. ඒ නිසා මම අර full discussion එක කරනව වෙනුවට ඒකේ කරපු discussion එකේ conclusion එක මම මෙතන ලියන්නම්. ඔයා අනිත් videos බලන්න. එතකොට ඔයාලට මේකේ A to Z කතන්දරය තේරෙනවා. Alright, so let's say that the demand is really elastic. If the demand is really elastic, we say that we have a negative relationship between P and producers revenue, price and producers revenue. And what does that mean? It means if you increase the price, producers revenue, right, revenue R will decrease. And if the demand is inelastic, right, if the demand is inelastic, we say there is a positive relationship between the price and the producer's revenue. And what's the meaning of that? Meaning is if you increase the price, producer's revenue will also increase. And the last one, if the demand is unitary elastic, right? If it's unitary elastic, we say we don't have any relationship. So no relationship between these two variables, price and the producer's revenue. And what does that mean? It means if you increase the price, producer's revenue will remain the same. Nothing will happen. Okay. I think what you are done now. And for this given product, if we have a negative 0.82 TED value, ඒකෙන් කියන්නේ elasticity is this inelastic. And there must be a positive relationship. So in order to increase the revenue, right? In order to increase the revenue, the producer should increase the price. එහෙනම් ආන්සර් එක මොකක්ද? Producer should increase the price because demand is inelastic. Fourth one is the answer. Right. 10th one. There we get this. In a competitive market, economic surplus is maximized when. So see, this is again not the first time that we discuss this one. Economic surplus is the total of consumer surplus and the producer surplus, and this economic surplus is maximized always at the market equilibrium, right? Economic surplus is maximized at the market equilibrium. එහෙනම් ඒක තමයි answer එක, at the market equilibrium, right? First one says quantity supplied equals to quantity demanded. See that now? This is the demand curve and this is the supply curve. Quantity demanded becomes equal to the quantity supplied at the market equilibrium. In say market equilibrium කියන වචනේ නොදී, they just give us that QD is equal to QS. So that happens at the market equilibrium. So this has to be the answer for the question. Right. 11th one. The demand for good X is price inelastic. Okay. If it is inelastic, when you calculate the TED, it has to be a value less than 1. If not, it has to be a value between 0 and 1. See that now? If you look at the TED in all these 5 options given, in all the options, TED is between 0 and 1. ඒ නිසා ඔයාට මෙතන බේස් කරගෙන ආන්සර් එකක් හොයාගන්න බෑ. All of these are possible values for PED if it is inelastic. Right. Now look at this second one. And income inelastic. See, if income is also inelastic, YED, when you find this income elasticity of demand, again you should receive a value lower than 1. Right? 0 and 1. It falls between 0 and 1. එහෙනම් එහෙම answers තියෙන්නේ first one and the third one and then again the fifth one. මොකද income inelastic නම් it has to be a value between 0 and 1. එහෙනම් එහෙම values තුනක් තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා දැන් අපිට තේරෙනවා this is not the answer and this is also not the answer. එහෙනම් අපිට දැන් options තුනයි තියෙන්නේ. First one, third one and the fifth one. Look at the last part. Good X is also a substitute to good Y. See, if these are two substitutes, what has to be the cross price elasticity of demand? For substitutes, cross price elasticity of demand is positive. ඒකට හේතුව තමයි between the two variables, price of the substitute and the demand of the considered good, right? Demand of the considered good, we have a positive relationship. සරලව ගත්තොත් Pepsi bottle එකක price එක, right? Pepsi bottle එකක price එක වැඩි වෙන්න when other things remain constant, Coca-Cola demand will increase, right? So due to this positive relationship that exists between these two variables, when you calculate this cross price elasticity of demand, it will be a positive value. එහෙනම් positive values තියෙන්නේ ඇත්තරම option 1 3 5 වලින් එකක විතරයි. So that the first one is the answer for this 11th one. Right. Now look at the 12th question. There it says, if a government passes an effective minimum wage law. See, it's not the minimum price imposed on a good. This time, it is an effective minimum wage law. ඒ කියන්නේ employers ලට කියනවා, you have to pay at least this much for all the employees. The resulting change in employment will be the smallest when which one of the following happens. අපි බලමු. Then, if you look at the answers, in all these answers, they talk about the elasticity, right? Demand elasticity. ඒ නිසා demand elasticity and supply elasticity දෙකම. ඒ නිසා මම දැන් මෙහෙම දෙයක් කරන්නම්. Let me take two diagrams. In the first diagram, let's say that we have elastic demand. So if the demand is elastic, right, the demand curve is almost flat, not 100% flat, but almost flat. ඒ කියන්නේ steeper ගතිය අඩුයි, flat ගතිය වැඩි. ඒ නිසා let me draw the demand curve this way. And if the supply is also elastic, right, මොකක්ද වෙන්න ඕන? Supply should start from the price axis, right? අපි හිතමු දැන් මේ වගේ situation එකක, right, මේ වගේ situation එකක this is the market price, this is the demand for labor, and this is a supply of labor. එතන මේ වගේ situation එක, this is the initial market price, if not initial wage, and this is the number of labor hours, right? Imagine that the government imposes a minimum wage law. එතකොට අපි તો මෙන්න මේ වගේ range එකක minimum wage law එකක් දැම්මා කියලා. So this is the demand for labor. See, demand for labor decreases. Quantity demanded of labor is a really lower value. And on this side, what do we get? The quantity supplied of labor, right? Quantity supplied of labor is very high. So if it's a good, right, if this is with regard to the goods and services market, this gap between higher supply and the lower demand, we could recognize as the excess supply. But this is about the factor market. This is the demand of labor and the supply of labor. So in the factor market, when the labor supply is higher than the labor demand, ඒ කියන්නේ වැඩ කරන්න කැමැත්තෙන් labor supply කරන්න කැමැත්තෙන් මිනිස්සු සෑහෙන ප්‍රමාණයක් ඉන්නවා. හැබැයි labor demand එක, labor ගන්න companies, firms තියෙන්නේ පොඩ්ඩයි. So in such a situation, we have a huge rate of unemployment in the economy. See, our excess supply here in the factor market, we recognize as unemployment. So when labor supply is elastic and when labor demand is elastic, see what happens? Unemployment is how much? Unemployment is this much, right? But look at the situation, look at the level of unemployment if labor demand and supply both are inelastic, right? So if labor supply is inelastic, supply curve starts from the quantity axis, and if the demand is inelastic, you will have a steeper demand curve. Okay, so this is the demand for labor, and let's say again, this is the market price or the market wage, and this is the quantity of labor hours. And again, assume that the government is imposing a minimum wage. දැන් මේ gap එක ඇත්තටම මෙතන තියෙන gap එක සහ පේනවනේ මෙතන තියෙන gap එක සහ මෙතන තියෙන gap එක almost same නේ. හරි. එතකොට බලන්න what happens to the quantity demanded of labor. See, quantity demanded is lower, but it reduces very insignificantly. පේන්නෙත් නෑ. Right? So this is the reduction in the demand. And see, this is the increase in labor supply. See, what happens to the level of unemployment now? Still, we have a certain level of unemployment, but that level of unemployment, right, compared to the previous situation, that is very low. එහෙනම් unemployment is lower when both demand and supply are inelastic. See then, if the government passes an effective minimum wage law, the resulting change in employment will be the smallest when, see, labor demand is relatively inelastic. Supply එකත් inelastic වුණොත් තමයි ඒක වැඩි perfectly වෙන්නේ. නමුත් මෙතන එහෙම option එකක් නැති නිසා from the provided answers, this is the best. Right, look at this 13th one. Assume that the market demand for X is this and the market supply for X is this. Suppose the government decides to have a deficiency payment scheme with guaranteed price floor set at rupees 52 per egg. What's the cost of this program to the government? All right, so this is very easy. We'll try it in this way. We will try to draw the demand curve and the supply curve. Right. Look at this one. The demand curve is, equation is given to us as QD equals 140 minus 2 times P. And the value that you find here is, it has to be 140. Then that 140 divided by this 2 has to be 70. So you have 70 here. And this is QD. Sorry, that's Q. And this is price. Okay, now we have the supply curve as well. So supply curve is given to us as minus 10 plus P. So it should start from the quantity axis, but by a minus value. So this is minus 10. So minus 10 divided by this coefficient, that is 1. So 10 over 1 is again 10. So even the value that comes here is 10. Right, now let's look at the given thing in the question again. See, when the things go in this way, the government sets the minimum price at rupees 52. Okay, so let's say that this is the minimum price, right? It's at 52, right? 52. Say they are going to have a deficiency payment scheme. In a deficiency payment scheme, what happens in a deficiency payment scheme? The government asks the farmers to supply whatever the amount that they are ready to supply at the minimum price. So when the price is 52, let's see how much is the supply, right? When the price is 52, see, quantity supplied is minus 10 plus P. So P is simply 52. So the quantity supplied would be 42. So that's the value you receive here, 42. Once the farmers supply the entire quantity, produce the entire quantity, the government asks farmers to sell that entire quantity to whatever the price that they receive from the market. Let's see the price that they receive from the market. Diagram එක චුට්ටක් විතර පොඩි කේස් එකක් තියෙනවා. ඒක ඔච්චර හිතන්න එපා. ඉතින් මේක ලස්සනට අඳින්න ඕන කියලා එකක් නෑ. අපිට මේ වෙලාවේ වැඩේ කරගන්න ඕන. එහෙනම් let's see how much is the price that they receive from the market. ඒක හොයන්න you can apply the demand curve. So quantity demanded is 140 minus 2 times P. So when the quantity is 42, let's see the maximum price, demand price. So it's 140 minus 2 times P. ඊට පස්සේ 2P is equal to 98. So price is how much? 98 over 2. That will be 49, right? Price is 49. Price is 49. Okay, see that now? Per unit deficiency payment, how much is that? The guaranteed price is 52 and the price that the farmers receive from the market is just 49. So per unit deficiency payment is the difference between 52 and this 49. And how much is that? That's simply 3. So let me write per unit deficiency payment. That is 52 minus 49, answer is 3. And then the total cost. How do we find this total cost? Total cost is calculated using this equation. You first take per unit deficiency payment and then you multiply that by the total quantity traded in the market. Traded in the market. So per unit deficiency payment is 3 and the total quantity traded in the market is 42. So 3 multiplied by 42 will be 126. And our answer is the second option. Right, now look at this 14th one. It says, in order to reduce the price of an essential consumer good, okay, the government has decided to provide a per unit subsidy. As a result, the price of the good will fall most when the price elasticity of demand. Okay, so as a result of providing this subsidy, if the price falls, the majority of the benefit of the subsidy passes to the consumer, right? Majority of the benefit passes to the consumer. මොකද subsidy එක producer දුන්නම market price එක අඩු වෙනවා නම් ඒ අඩු වෙන amount එකෙන් consumer ට තමයි benefit එක pass වෙන්නේ. ඒතර ඒක වෙන්නේ කොහොමද? taxes වලදීත් subsidies වලදීත් ඒක වෙන්නේ එකම විදිහට මෙන්න මෙහෙමයි. If the, let's say for example, if the demand is inelastic, right? If demand is inelastic, and if it's a tax, right? Higher proportion of tax is borne by this inelastic party. Since the demand is inelastic, higher proportion of the tax is borne by the consumer. Subsidies. If it's a subsidy, higher benefit of the subsidy is enjoyed by the consumer. Inelastic වෙන්නේ කවුද? එයාට තමයි tax burden එකේ majority කියන්නේ. නැත්නම් subsidy benefit එකේ majority එක කියන්නේ. Now, for another example, if you assume this supply is inelastic here, if supply is inelastic, once again, who gets the highest tax burden? The producer, the supplier. Inelastic party එකට තමයි කියන්නේ. එතකොට අනිත් පැත්තෙන් if it's a subsidy and if the supply is inelastic, right, the majority of the subsidy is enjoyed by the supplier. හරි, එහෙනම් දැන් මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ අහන්නේ price of the good will fall most. See, which means the majority of the subsidy benefit passes to the consumer, and that happens when demand is inelastic. See, fourth one, demand is inelastic. Right, the 15th question. In the short run, a perfectly competitive firm is producing where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. Okay, let's observe this situation using a graph. So assume that this is the marginal cost curve and this is the marginal revenue curve. And at this given level of output, what happens? Marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, which means the firm must be producing somewhere here. See, imagine that they are producing this Q1 level. At this Q1 level, marginal revenue is above the marginal cost. And we all should know that the firm's profitability get maximized at the point where MR becomes equal to MC and MC is rising. එහෙනම් This is the level of output. Q2 is the level of output which maximizes firm's profitability. Right? If they are still producing this Q1 level of output, and in order to maximize their profit, what should they do? They should increase their output to Q2 level. Right? They should increase the output to Q2 level. Answer increase the quantity that they are producing. Yes, they should increase the quantity that they are producing right now in order to maximize their profitability. Right. 16. In order to minimize short-run losses, under which of the following conditions a profit maximizing firm in a competitive market will necessarily shut down operations? Make a 100% theory කතන්දරයක් නේ. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ සිරා ප්‍රැක්ටිකල් කතන්දර. නමුත් අපි theory එකේ මේක කියනවා හරියම පැහැදිලිව. If the firm cannot cover at least their average variable cost from the price that they are receiving from the market. Mathematically, if the average variable cost is greater than the price that they receive from the market, මෙහෙම businesses කරලා වැඩක් නැහැ. ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයා මේ product එක හදන්න ඒ වෙනුවෙන්ම දරන variable cost is greater than the price you receive from the market. ඒකට ඔය මම කියන example එක තමයි හිතනවා දැන් ඔයා පික්මී එකක කොහේ හරි යනකොට if average variable cost is greater than the price that the driver receives, ඒක හරියට මේ වගේ. Driver receives a price that is really lower than the, let's say, fuel cost. The fuel cost එක රුපියල් 150යි. හැබැයි ඒ ට්‍රිප් එකට එයාට හම් වෙන amount එක රුපියල් 100. ඉතින් එතකොට මේ වගේ businesses කරලා වැඩක් නැති නිසා ඊට වඩා හොඳයි එයා හයක නොගිහින් ඉන්නවා. එහෙම නැත්නම් එක business එකක්, ඒ කියන්නේ වෙන production firm එකක් නම් ඊට වඩා හොඳයි ඒගොල්ලෝ firm එකේ operations ඔක්කොම shut down කරනවා. So simple as that. එහෙනම් මෙතන මොකක්ද answer එක වෙන්න ඕනේ? Answer වෙන්න ඕනේ price has to be lower than the average variable cost. හැබැයි ඔයා මේ options වල බැලුවොත් you don't find that. ඒගොල්ලෝ ඒ වෙනුවට කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? Average revenue is less than the average variable cost. 100% true. Why? Because if it's a firm that is operating in the competitive market, in the perfect competition, we know for sure price is equal to average revenue. ඒ විතරක් නෙමෙයි, even price is equal to marginal revenue. එතන මේ කොයි වචනේ use කළා it doesn't matter, because all are equal if it's a firm operating in a perfectly competitive market. And so answer for this 16 is the fourth one. Right, 17. Look at the 17th one. The table below shows the total cost and profit for different levels of output sold by a firm in a competitive market. Okay, now if you look at the table, you get the outputs, also the total costs and the profits. So what's the relationship among these three? Or at least what's the relationship among these two, total cost and profit? So if you remember this thing, economic profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost. You can recognize the relationship between the two variables. See, if you add, listen to this, the value given for economic profit and the total cost, what should you receive? You should receive total revenue. See, economic profit plus total cost has to be total revenue. So let me add the two values then, total cost with the profit, and let me develop the total revenue column. So in the first one, 600 plus 600 is just 1200. In the second one, it's 1500. And in the third one, it's 1800. Now you have the total revenues. But if you look at the provided options, they talk about prices. Then think, what's the relationship between the total revenue and the prices? Then you will get this. Total revenue is equal to price multiplied by quantity. If so, in this column, you get the total revenue. In this column, you get the quantities. So if you divide this total revenue by the quantity, what will be the output? Output will be P, price. So let me do that and find prices at every level of output. Okay, so total revenue, that is 1200 divided by 20 will give us 60. And then 1500 divided by 30 will give us 50. 1800 divided by 40 will give us 45. Right, 45. So these are the prices at these given levels of output. Okay, now we will read one by one. The first option says 20 units to 30 units, 20 units to 30 units, price falls by rupees 50. No, price falls by rupees 10. So that's wrong there. Second one, 20 units to 30 units, price falls by 60. No, it falls by 10. So that is also wrong. Third one says 30 units to 40 units, price, see the number, 30 units to 40 units, right? Price falls by rupees 40. No, 30 to 40, price falls only by 5. So that is also wrong there. Fourth one, 30 units to 40 units, price falls by 5, 100% true. So 30 to 40, price falls by 5. So answer for this question 17 is the fourth one. Right, now look at this 18th question. There it says, which of the following statements concerning short-run cost is false? Right, short-run cost. Before I go through the answers, let me show you the short-run cost curves. Here you see the cost curves related to the short run. On the first diagram, you get the TC, TVC, TFC. And then in the second diagram, you get MC, ATC, AVC, AFC. Everything you have here. Okay, first one. Average total cost and average variable cost curves are U-shaped. See, ATC and AVC, are they U-shaped? Look at this one. ATC and AVC, they are U-shaped, correct. And the second one, so first one is correct, but they ask us to recognize a false statement. Second one, the gap between average total cost and average variable cost is marginal cost. See, the gap between these two, the gap between this average total cost and the average variable cost, the gap between the two is actually average fixed cost, not the marginal cost. So that is the false statement. See, the gap between average total cost and average variable cost is not the marginal cost, it is the average fixed cost. So answer for this one is second. But we will go through the other options. Third one says the gap between average total cost and average variable cost narrows as output increased. See, the gap between the two, ATC and AVC, it narrows down. The gap reduces when the quantity increases. That is also true. And the next one says marginal cost curve cuts the average variable cost at its minimum point. See, marginal cost curve cuts the average variable cost curve. See, marginal cost curve cuts the average variable cost curve at its minimum point. 100% true. And the last one says marginal cost curve cuts the average total cost curve at its minimum point. අර වගේමයි, see, marginal cost curve cuts the average total cost again at the minimum point. Those are true statements, but the second one is false, and that's why it becomes the answer. Right. 19. In an open economic model, the gross domestic product is estimated as the sum of, see, they just talk about the open economic model and the GDP. So why do they give us this thing in an open economic model? Because they wanted to highlight the fact that in this economy, we get both imports and exports. And then on the other side, they talk about the GDP. එහෙනම් imports exports තියෙන GDP හොයන equation මොකක්ද? So we write GDP equals C plus I plus G plus net exports. So this is the relevant equation. Now with regard to this equation, let's see. GDP is estimated as the sum of final consumption expenditure. See, it's not about the private consumption or the government consumption. They just talk about the final consumption expenditure, which means that has to be the total of C and G. ඒතර C and G පොඩ්ඩක් එක පැත්තකට ගත්තොත් අනිත් පැත්ත ඉතුරු වෙනවා අනිත් පැත්තේ මේ නමුත් ඉතුරු වෙනවා I and NX ඒ ටික මම මේ පැත්තේ ලියා ගන්නවා. Right. So when they say final consumption expenditure, that's a total of C and G. And then gross domestic capital formation, so that is just I. And net export. See, when you get the total of these three components, if not indirectly, what happens when you get the total of these three components? You get the total of all these four components. See, that's how you calculate this GDP under the expenditure approach. So this first option itself has to be the correct answer. Right, then no point of discussing the other ones. We'll move to the 20th. Gross national savings can be calculated by deducting which of the following from gross national disposable income. හරි. ඔයාලට මෙහෙම එකක් මතක නා. Simply නිකන් අපි කියනවා disposable income consists of two components. So what are the two components? Consumption and then savings. So then ඔයාලට මෙතන හොයන්න ඕනි savings නම් just subject savings from this equation. So savings will be equal to disposable income minus consumption. එච්චරක් සරලයිනේ. එහෙනම් gross national savings can in the exact same way. Again, you can find the gross national savings by deducting consumption expenditure from the gross national disposable income. So answer is the second one. Right, 21. Which of the following statements is correct? First one says earnings from gambling. ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයා gambling කරනවා and you earn something. ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයා earn කරනවා කියලා කියන්නේ ඔයා පොඩි bet එකක් දාලා ඔයාට තමයි ඒක chance එක එන්නේ. ඒ නිසා ඔයා ඒ සල්ලි ටික අරගෙන ගෙදර එනවා. ඔයා bet එක දානකොට ඔයා කියනවා right I bet this amount for this given thing, and then somehow you win this. So once you win, you collect the total amount of money. මොකද ඔයා bet කරපු සල්ලි සහ අනිත් අය bet කරපු සල්ලි දෙකම දැන් ඔයාට එනවා. එතකොට මේකේ කියනවා අන්න ඒ earnings ගැන. Earnings from gambling are included in the production boundary of national accounts. දැන් ඔයා මේක එක එක විදි වලට හිතන්න පුළුවන්. මේක illegal, ඒ නිසා මේක එන්නේ නැහැ. එහෙම කතන්දර නැහැ. මේක 100% legal. ඒ කියන්නේ 100%ම නෙමෙයි. Legal gambling තියෙනවා, illegal gambling තියෙනවා. But here they just talk about gambling in general. And remember the other thing, they don't just talk about the gambling, they talk about the earnings from gambling. එතකොට මම කිව්වේ මොකද්ද? ඔයා bet කරනවා let's say 100,000. අනිත් අය bet කරනවා තව 100,000 bet කරනවා and you win. So you collect all the money and that's the earning you receive from gambling. එතකොට do you include that in the production boundary? No. Why? ඔයා කියනවා නෑ සර් ඒක illegal. Illegal කතන්දරයක් නිසා නෙමෙයි. This is 100%, right? A financial transaction. 100% of financial. ඔයා 100,000 දානවා අනිත් අයත් 100,000 දානවා. So you collect all the money. So that's 100% financial transaction. ඒ නිසා earnings from gambling is not recorded in the calculation of GDP. That is not considered. Okay. හැබැයි මේක කියනවා are included. No, that is not included. So this is wrong. Second one, consumption of durable capital is not a component in primary income. So if you remember the way that you calculate the primary income, what's the first entry? Compensation of employees. And what's the second entry? Gross operating surplus. And if I ask you how to calculate this gross operating surplus, gross operating surplus is equal to net operating surplus plus consumption of capital, consumption of fixed capital, which is a component of primary income. හැබැයි මේගොල්ලෝ කියනවා it is not a component in primary income. No, again wrong. Third one, growing vegetables in backyard for personal use is counted in measuring of GDP. 100% true, right? Growing vegetables for self-consumption should be included into the GDP calculation at the market price. So this is true then. The fourth one, provision of free education services by the government is not counted in the measuring of gross domestic product. දැන් මේ වගේ ඒවා ඔයාලා හිතන්න පුළුවන් transfers වගේ කියලා. නමුත් එහෙම එකක් නෙමෙයි මෙතන තියෙන්නේ. Wait, I'll show you the note related to this. So everyone look at this one. This is about the production boundary. And then I'm telling you economic activities included in GDP of a country. Look at the second one. Non-market aimed goods and services. These are goods distributed free of charge or at a certain price without the profit motive. The value of these goods and services is estimated at the cost incurred to produce them. And look at the example. Goods and services offered by the government and non-profit institutions serving households. So that is the relevant theory for this part of the question. Provision of free education services by the government is a non-market aimed good or service provided by the government to the households, which should be included in the calculation of GDP according to the production boundary. හැබැයි මේගොල්ලෝ කියනවා it is not counted කියලා, so that this is false. Fifth one says mixed income is earned by all institutional units. මම මේකටත් note එකකට පෙන්නනවා. Look at this one, mixed income. See, mixed income, this is the income earned by unincorporated enterprises owned by households. Unincorporated enterprises owned by households. But the statement says mixed income is earned by all institutional units, which is wrong. Right. Then the answer for this question 21 is the third one. Right. Look at this question 22. Suppose that last year's real GDP of a country was 12,000. This year's nominal GDP is 16,500. And the GDP deflator for the year is 150. What's the growth rate of real GDP of this country? Growth rate of real GDP. Okay. But my first question, do we have real GDP for both years? For the time being, we don't have. So let's find the real GDP value for both years. Okay, this is the first year. And then on the other side, we have the second year. So for the first year, real GDP is directly given to us as 12,000. But for the second year, it's up to us to find this real GDP. So what's the equation? You write nominal GDP divided by GDP deflator into 100. Right? This is into 100. So nominal GDP is given to us as 16,500. That is divided by the GDP deflator, if not simply the price index, that is 150. And we multiply this by 100. So how much we receive? 16,500 divided by 150 into 100 will be 11,000. Right? That will be 11,000. So now we have the real GDP value for both years. But is that the answer for the question? No. The question asks us to calculate what's the real growth rate of real GDP. What's the growth rate of real GDP? එහෙනම් growth rate එක ගොන්න වෙන මෙහෙමයි. In the second year it was 11,000 and in the first year it was 12,000. එතකොට මේක grow වෙලා තියෙන කොච්චරකින්ද? 12,000 තිබ්බ value එක මෙච්චරකින් change වෙලා. Right? කලින් අවුරුද්දේ 12,000 තිබ්බ value එක මෙච්චරකින් change වෙලා එනම් as a percentage how much is that? Right? As a percentage how much is that? එතන මෙතන ඔයාලට එන්නේ see minus 1000 over 12,000 into 100, so that the growth rate is really a minus value, that's minus 8.33%. And the answer is the fourth one. Right, now look at this question 23. There, what do we get? You are given following macroeconomic data for a hypothetical economy. We get savings, budget deficit, net exports. According to this information, what must be the level of investment for this economy? See, they talk about savings, budget deficit, net exports, investments. So where do we get all of these? We get all of these in this equation. Injections equals withdrawals. So what are the injections? We write I plus G plus X. And what are the withdrawals? We write S plus T plus M. Right? And they ask us to recognize the level of investment, and savings is given, budget deficit is given. So when you look at this thing, you don't see the budget deficit. But wait, I'll show you that properly. What if you take this G to the other side? S is here anyway. Now you write tax. When you take this G to the other side, it becomes minus G. Right? And what's this now? That is the difference between tax revenue and the government purchases, which is the budget deficit. ඒත් එක්කම net exports තියෙනවා. Net exports දැක ගමන් පේන්නේ නැහැ. But what if I take this imports to this side? So it becomes X then. G අර පැත්තට ගත්තා. එයා මෙතන නැහැ. හැබැයි X තියෙනවා. අර M මේ පැත්තට එනකොට it becomes minus M. And what's that? That's net exports. So you write investments equals net exports. Exports minus import. Remember that's a minus value. Equals savings, that's 500. And budget, remember deficit. Which means the tax revenue is lower than the government purchases. So even that has to be a minus value. Right, now what do you receive? I minus 50 equals 500 minus 100. So that I equals 500 minus 100 plus 50. And the answer is 450. So answer has to be the third one. Right, now look at this question number 24. These are easy. Question 24. Consider an economy where marginal propensity to consume is 0.9. How much will the total output in this economy increase if the government transfers are increased by 500 billion? Okay, to recognize the answer, we need to first find the transfer multiplier. So let me write KTR. Transfer multiplier is equal to plus MPC over 1 minus MPC. So MPC is 0.9 over 1 minus 0.9, and the answer will be just 9. Now, the change in national income is equal to multiplier times the change in transfers. So transfer multiplier is 9, change in transfers is 500 billion. That's an increase of 500 billion. So the change in national income will be how much? 4,500. Answer is the fourth one. Right, now come to this question 25. There it says, in a hypothetical economy, real GDP is 10,000 billion. Okay, so this is a real GDP amount, and full employment real GDP is 8,000 billion. See that now the current level of GDP is 10,000, and the full employment real GDP is 8,000, which means the current level of GDP has increased the full employment level of GDP. And what does that mean? There is an inflationary pressure in this economy. If there is an inflationary pressure in the economy, aggregate demand must be greater. In this given economy, aggregate demand must be greater. හරි. දැන් අපි බලමු මොකක්ද requirement කියලා. Which of the following combinations of policies might have brought the economy to this point? Economy के aggregate demand එක මෙච්චර වැඩි වෙන්න reason එක මොකක්ද? අපි බලමු මේක. Right, the first option says decrease in taxes. Hari. This is for the first option. So when tax rate is decreased, people can consume more and they can invest more. So when they consume more and when they invest more, see inside the aggregate demand ඔයාලා හැමෝම දන්නවා we have C plus I plus G plus NX. So when C and I get increased, even AD get increased. එතකොට ඔන්න aggregate demand එක ඇත්තටම වැඩි වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. First part is correct. Look at the second part. An increase in policy rate. So what is a policy rate? Policy rate කියලා කියන්නේ අපි policy rate කියලා කියන්නේ interest rates නෙමෙයි. Policy rates කියලා කියන්නේ SDFR and SLFR. But when they are increased, what happens? The interest rate also increases. So interest rate increases. When interest rate is increased, what happens to the consumption? Consumption will be lower. මොකද මිනිසුන්ට loans ගන්න බෑ, interest rate is high. ඒ නිසා ඒගොල්ලෝ loans අරගෙන consume කරන්නේ නැහැ. සහ ඒගොල්ලෝ loans අරගෙන invest කරන්නේ නැහැ. And as a result, what will happen to the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand will be lower. See, the two change in the opposite directions. From the first part, AD increases, but from the second part, AD decreases. ඒ නිසා this will not be the answer. මොකද අපිට වෙන්න ඕන finally there must be an increase in aggregate demand, because then only the current GDP will be greater than the full employment level of GDP. Now make a answer. Look at the second one. Decrease in taxes. Then decrease in taxes කියලා කියන්නේ අර කලින් ටිකමනේ. So once again in the second option, when the tax rate is decreased, අර මම පළවෙනි එකේ කියපු දේවල් ටික ඒ විදිහටම වෙනවා. Decrease in interest rate. See, දැන් මම කලින් කිව්වේ what if interest rate is increased කියලානේ. දැන් ඒකේ opposite. So if the interest rate is decreased, you can obtain loans at a lower cost, so that you will obtain more and more loans and you will increase the consumption. You will increase the investment. And as a result, what will happen? Even aggregate demand will increase. See, from both suggestions in the second option, decrease in taxes now, aggregate demand increases. Again, when interest rates are decreased, again aggregate demand is increased. Now දෙකෙම වෙන්නේ aggregate demand එක වැඩි වෙන එක. So this is the answer. Right, we will go through the other options as well. බලා ගන්න. Third one says decrease in taxes. එතකොට අර කතන්දරේමනේ. Taxes get decreased, consumption get increased, so that aggregate demand get increased. ඒක හරි. Decrease in taxes. Selling government securities on open market. See, on this side we have the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and then we have the commercial banks. See what happens when the central bank sells treasury bills to the commercial banks pass cash to the central bank. When the commercial bank pass cash to the central bank, what happens to their excess reserves? Their excess reserves will decrease. And when excess reserves get decreased, what happens to the ability to create credit? Ability to create credit also decreases, so that money supply decreases. Then again interest rates will increase, and as I explained earlier, when interest rates are increased, consumption decreases, investment decreases, and as a result aggregate demand decreases. එහෙනම් අපිට වමනාදේ වෙන්නේ නැහැ from the second part of this option 3. එහෙනම් this part is wrong. Fourth one, increase in government purchases. Simply G, increase in G. See, when G is increased, aggregate demand is increased. Eka hari. An increase in statutory reserve ratio. See, when statutory reserve ratio is increased, what happens? Again, the excess reserves will decrease, ability to create credit will decrease, money supply will decrease, interest rates will increase. Ara katandare එහෙමම වෙනවා. So aggregate demand will finally decrease. හැබැයි අපිට වමනාදේ ඒක නෙමෙයි. So this is not the answer here. Decrease in taxes. ඒක හරිය කියන එක දැන් අපිට පැහැදිලිනේ. decrease in government purchase. See the no taxes adu kalama consumption will be somewhat higher. Habai, there's a decrease in government purchases, so we can't ensure that aggregate demand increases from this fifth option. So ඒකත් නෙමෙයි answer. So the correct answer for this question 25 has to be the second one.